Next up for South Carolina, we had July 1, we had July 2, July 3rd, our guy Nate Carson from actually from Chris's neck of the woods in Irmo, South Carolina, 4-star offensive lineman, picking the Gamecocks in the end over, what was it, Chris? Georgia, Clemson, Colorado
Yep.
officially. Man, Tennessee, you got to mention Tennessee too. They weren't in the final group, but Tennessee was in this thing for the longest. I would say for a hefty portion of this sort of recruitment, I kind of thought Tennessee might be South Carolina's biggest competition here, even though, and we've talked about this for those who listen to the other shows, there was kind of that ebb and flow of, well, he visited Georgia. Georgia was the public leader. Visited Clemson. Clemson was the public leader. I think we were on that one, to just be completely frank. Like, we'll tell people if we were off and like, hey, this was a surprise. It felt like a recruitment that was a play the long game recruitment. Hang in there. Let's see what happens at the end. I will not call out the one poster who every time we talked about Nate Carson possibly going to South Carolina told me we were wrong. Not going to call him out by name. But the Gamecocks get it done. They get Nate Carson on the commit list. And, man, that was 3 blue chippers in 3 days at that point. And keeping the top offensive lineman in the state of South Carolina, the top offensive lineman in the Midlands at home. And this is another upside kid, man. Like, I think you look at offensive linemen, there's a lot of guys who can play guard. There's a lot of guys who can play center that you can go get. But there are far fewer guys who can play out there on the perimeter of the O-line. I think Rivals, are we still even? Yeah, we're still listing him on the interior. But, dude, I look at the frame. I look at this highlight, which we're going to play here in a moment. I mean, I'm not saying he's definitely 100% always going to be a tackle, but I think there is tackle athleticism. There's tackle length. There are definitely some tackle just qualities to Nate Carson as a prospect.
Oh, and South Carolina also believes he can play tackle. And I think we're kind of getting a sense following recruiting and what Randy Clements and Jason Smith and Sam Survey are doing on the offensive line. And, yeah, they're still bringing in guys where sometimes you check, okay, where does South Carolina see this guy? And sometimes you hear, hey, he might can play guard or tackle. He can be interior or tackle. Carson, I think they feel this a similar way, but they kind of seem to have him on the board more as a tackle. And I think when you watch this film, or if you see Nate Carson in person, you can tell why. Going up here against, at one time, Michigan commit, but now Gamecock freshman Julian Walker. And that is, he's got the athleticism and the ability to move his feet enough to be able to play tackle in the SEC, to play it at a high level against pass rushers. You're going to be going against guys who are going to be first-round picks, NFL draft picks. You see how quickly he can get out of his stance there. He can move. He can get out in the run game. Like, he's got plus movement ability for a guy his size. He's got a really good frame. He can get bigger. He can get stronger, more refined technically. But you start with the size to athleticism ratio, and he's got that. He also, I think, you watch him on film, he's not one of those guys that only relies on his size. He's someone who likes to go play to the whistle. And that's something I always like to see out of high school offensive linemen. There are a lot of guys at the high school level who are just big enough to bully, lesser talent. But what makes them translate to the college level, can they move? Are they willing to get better, put in the work? Do they do things like this where you're blocking guys to the whistle? And Nate Carson does that on film too. But I think you start with just the athletic traits, and he's got a lot of those.
Yeah, and just the willingness to get downfield too, the ability to get downfield, that maybe starts to creep into the conversation too, man, when you talk about a Kendall Briles offense. And, obviously South Carolina and those guys hope that it's very successful, and Kendall and this scheme is here for a long time. You got to have some agility, some ability to get on the line quickly and not get worn down and stuff like that to play this spot in this scheme. So I think that's a fit there. To your point, man, I like that there's a mean streak on the field, because when you talk to Nate off the field, he smiles, he's joking, great personality, just the type of kid you enjoy interviewing. Gives you good in-depth answers, and kind of tells you what's on his mind. And so basically, is someone who I think when you look at who he is off the field, it feels like he's one of those guys who can like flip the switch, when we enter the lines, basically. So I think you got to have both those things, right, if you are going to play O line, especially in the SEC.
Yeah, no doubt. And great personality off the field. Probably one of our, I think we're on the same page. Guy that we really like talking to and getting to know over the past few years. And Wes, to go back to the recruitment just a little bit here, it has some similarities to Dobson and Davion in that, Carolina was, I think, Nate Carson's first offer. Like maybe not even first Power Four. Like I think they were the first school to offer him and offered him, Travian Robertson actually extended the offer as the area recruiter. He's a guy that early on was thought of as, hey, maybe this is a D lineman, maybe this is an O lineman, and obviously developed into more where everybody's recruiting him as an offensive lineman. But the Gamecocks are in very early here, and you always kind of got the sense, hey, this is one that it seems like it has South Carolina written all over it, but you knew a prospect to that caliber is going to keep getting offers. He enjoyed the recruiting process. He took a lot of visits. And you mentioned earlier, quite frankly, a lot of times he would go and visit a school and they would make an impression, and he's thinking a lot about that school when he left that visit. Another one to where I think it was very important that South Carolina got the last at bat here. He was in on that same weekend as Dobson and Davion Jones. South Carolina had a lot of success with the guys they brought in that weekend who were uncommitted. They only didn't get one of them, MJ Evans, who went to Auburn. And so they're able to go grab him and kind of have things circle back to South Carolina, which was really always the constant, I think, in this recruitment. There are a lot of schools that, rose to the top or were a co-leader with the Gamecocks. At the end of the day, they were the most stable in this recruitment.
Well, and remember early on, man, I feel like there was some, I don't know if it was buzz to the extent of like, this is where he was headed, but I remember Ohio State being a school that Nate seemed to be very, very intrigued by. And you were kind of going, does he want to go that far? But I mean, it's Ohio State. Like they recruit as well as anybody in the country. So this was a kid who had a bunch of really high quality offers. And ultimately, you want to do everything you can to keep these guys at home. And, kudos to all those guys. Sam Sorbet was kind of the long-term relationship here. But, we talked to Nate after his South Carolina official visit, Chris. Lots of love for Jay Smooth and for Randy Clements as well, even though they kind of came in towards the latter part of his recruitment because of the change at O-line coach. So, I think that was a big part of that was just him hitting it off with those guys too. As Austin says here, not saying he's as big of a freak as Shakarius Peak yet, but he does kind of fit that athlete, twitchy, 6'4", 6'5" type mold that we're seeing maybe South Carolina target at this point, as opposed to like the 6'7", 6'8", Corey Robinson type guys at the tackle spot. So, I'm curious to see how Nate fits in long term. I see why Charles and those guys have him as an interior guy, but I really think he's someone, as I said in the open, who has a chance long term to remain at tackle for South Carolina. And as you saw in the film, there is playing left tackle at Irmo and just kind of holding down the blind side there.